Welcome to another Coffee with Samso, where we speak with ASX companies and the guys who run these companies. Today we're at Voco Melbourne Central in Melbourne, and we've got a new story here today, a different, maybe in some ways slightly different. It's Clean TeQ Water. The code is CNQ, and the current market cap is about 25 million. And we've got Willem Vriesendorp here as the CEO of the company, who's going to give us his thoughts on the company. So, Willem, thank you for coming, Coffee Samso.
Very happy to be here.
Look, Willem, it's a sort of it's a mining story, not a mining story, but it's a critical resource story. It's the way I sort of envisage what Clean TeQ is all about. So can you maybe give us an intro to yourself, and then let's run through the story?
Yes, sure. First of all, I would say it's a water story. It's just that we have in our background, in our products, quite a bit of mining focus and mining background. But I can go into that in some more detail later. My personal background is I'm Dutch, so I grew up in the Netherlands, studied physics. I worked at McKinsey for a while in energy, and also personally very interested in clean energy. And then on the back of that, I decided to move to China because I felt there was a lot happening in China at the time, which was the case in clean energy and clean tech in general. And at that time, when I entered China, I first joined a venture capital company, a small venture capital company active in this area. And then at that time, I also got in touch with other areas of sustainability, including water. And then I set up my own water company, and in that capacity I got in touch with Clean TeQ. At the time, that was Clean TeQ, that is now Sunrise Energy Metals. So that company was at the time led by Peter Voigt, who is still the chairman of our company. So we were in touch, and then I joined Clean TeQ as the general manager of the water business.
Okay.
So, and that water business within Sunrise Energy Metals got split out of Sunrise Energy last July, so that's July 2021. We got officially separately listed on the stock exchange, so we've now been trading a bit over a year as an independent company.
I mean, it's good that you highlight it is water. I mean, water in some ways a lot of people have sort of dismissed or misunderstood it as a critical resource. And it's very important how we go forward with it, because I treat water as part of the critical metals, critical resource, critical resource. Can you sort of give us your take on that commentary, how true, or your own take on it?
Yes, so it's very much a critical resource. And I think there was an article the other day in The Economist where they said if climate change is the shark, water is its teeth. And what it meant to say is effectively what you now see around the world, and I think today is a very, very good example, is the effect of things like climate change having a lot of impact on businesses around the world through water. And I think that has its effect on companies and governments is that water has now really moved into, I think for a lot of companies, center stage. And that includes mining companies. At least a lot of the mining companies we talk to have a major focus on water, but also a lot of the multinational we work with these days have a lot of focus on water as a central element of their concerns, as a central element actually within climate change to manage. So if you say there's obviously a difference with metals, so there's much more water around. So in that sense, it is different. There's a different dynamic. We can go into detail there. But the fact that it's very critical for businesses and for businesses' core operations, I think that is now finally, after I think many decades of talking about water, really becoming very apparent. Right? There are plenty of mines that cannot operate or are at risk of not continuing to operate because of water shortages. There's plenty of mines that have a problem with their managing of their tailings, managing of their evaporation ponds, right? So they have a mining process, they create wastewater, and then they need to do something with it. And I think it used to be quite common for a lot of the mines, it's still quite common, that you have these massive tailings or evaporation ponds with a lot of water, but that's getting harder and harder And also when a mine closes, you have this challenge of what to do now with these legacy assets. And that's also becoming a problem. So it's a problem because these companies need to manage it, right? And it's also often on their balance sheet. It actually is a problem. So you can actually see that on their balance sheet as a future liability. So I think there's a lot of things happening in the water sector in general, and I put it next to mining here because we're quite focused on mining. So we're focused on mining customers, and also because your audience, there are quite a lot of people that know that sector quite well.
I mean, so what is the core of the business, I guess? Clean tech as it is. I remember when I first approached you, I said, are you this or are you that?
Yes.
So can you just run us down on what is the core of Clean tech, the core business?
Yes. So that is a very good question because we are, if you double click on us, there's 3 businesses within our overall business. So if I say overall, we are very focused on water. So we provide technology for water treatment. And water treatment is the overall name for both recovery of water for reuse, but it can also be treatment for disposal into the environment. So that's if you look at it from a distance, that's what we do. But if you look at it sort of one level deeper, it is really 3 businesses. So one is what we call our water solutions business. So there we've built a number of very unique solutions on a platform of some very unique technologies that we have. So these technologies have a long history. We've spent a lot of time developing, a lot of money developing. They're patented, and we built a number of solutions on top of them. An example is nitrate removal. So nitrate is a problem around the world. It's a pollutant. It's getting increasingly attention because it's causing both environmental pollution and ecological degradation through algae blooms, etc. So it gets a lot of attention from that perspective. Health-wise, it gets a lot of extra attention these days. We used to think that certain levels were safe, and now more and more places in the world are saying these levels we thought were safe are actually not safe. In the long term, you see effects of that are very unhealthy. So for these 2 reasons, you see regulation getting more and more strict. And we have a solution that's very geared towards that trend. So our solution is able to remove nitrates to 0 effectively, and then sort of get into that market. That's much harder to address than the old technologies did. So this is an example of our water solutions business. We have our unique technology and we have a unique solution for addressing this problem. We have a bunch of other ones in there. Second business is we've developed our own membrane. And we can talk about that if there's time, sort of in general, on what is sort of our overall philosophy of our technology development. But one theme in that technology development is the challenges that now exist with membranes.
We're doing physical membrane here.
Exactly. So a membrane or a filter that took, you could say, the water sector over the last few decades, took over much of the water sector. So everywhere you go, they put these membranes in, and that was driven by the need to create much cleaner water, much more recycling, and membranes are very suitable for that. So there's no criticism on the use of membrane in general. It's just that it's overused. And in a sector like mining is a good example where people put membranes where they shouldn't be. And that's just because membrane, as you can imagine, has a number of benefits, right? It's a barrier, so you know exactly what it does. It's sort of very straightforward. The disadvantage is that a barrier creates secondary waste. So you stop the pollutants, but the pollutants go out in a liquid, so that's secondary waste. It's a big problem. Another problem with membranes is that they foul. So you get, on the surface of a membrane, you get a lot of issues. So as you could imagine, membranes are very suitable for very well specified water that's relatively clean. It's much less suitable for water that's not as clean, that's very variable, and mining water is a great example. Ground bore water is a great example. So in our general philosophy of many of our solutions is to find something better compared to the current membrane solutions. And now I'm back to my second business. So the first business was solutions, the second business is our membrane. So we developed our own graphene membrane. And that graphene membrane is a different platform. So we have graphene as the active layer. And graphene has a number of very attractive properties. And one of them is resistance to fouling. Another one is energy efficiency, so it uses much less energy. And because of these benefits, we see that as sort of a very revolutionary development in that sector. So that's the second business. So we have our solutions, we have our membranes, and then third, we have metal recovery in our portfolio. So our third business is using our technology and using actually a technology that's the core for our water business, also as a foundation for our metal recovery business. And in both of those cases, what our technology does very well is taking out certain pollutants, or in the metal recovery business, that's not pollutants, that's actually valuable metals, taking them out and then recover them at a very highly concentrated.
As a process of mining the metal.
Exactly.
Okay.
And in mining, in metal recovery, where are we different and where do we come in? That is mostly related to secondary sources of mining. So that could be a tailings dam, right? So there's water out of a tailings dam that you would want to use or reuse, or you want to treat. And if there's valuable metals in it, we can recover them very effectively. So what we can do is take a marginal resource, so say an evaporation pond or a tailings dam, or wastewater. And if there's valuable metals in those secondary resources, our technology is very good to create that, which is often a liability, and turn it into an asset. So to take that value and really recover it in such a way that it becomes very valuable.
Okay. So, 2 points I've picked up and I thought maybe we should focus on is, obviously in today's age, the metal recovery part is very valuable and in terms of CapEx.
Yeah.
So is the business going in there to say, ABC company, you've got this tailings dam, we can do this for them? Or is the business going in there and saying, ABC company, you got this, I can help you recover this and we can share the profits? Is that the business?
Very good question. First, one sentence on clarifying the status of these three businesses. So the reason I talk most about the water solutions business is that's the area where we are now gone into the growth stage. That's where most of our people are employed. Our revenues are generated by that business. The new membrane business and the metal recovery business is 1 or 2 years before that stage. And in the metal recovery business, to get to your question, you could look for sort of an example of what we're trying to achieve a little bit at what happened in the last, before we split up. So before we split up, we were part of Sunrise. And within Sunrise, so within the flow sheet of Sunrise, our technology is part of that flow sheet. So the metal refinery that's within Sunrise has at its core a number of our core technologies. And what we did there is take an asset that's sort of not used because not considered valuable enough, and by matching it with technology, with our unique technology, create a lot of value, right? And now we're split out of that, but that's what we do. So that's a long answer to your question. Is our objective with this technology is to once again try to use our technology in an asset or in a company where we can create that extra value and then get a share of that extra value. So not just selling the equipment.
Yeah.
How that's structured is, as you can imagine, a bit of a complex discussion. So unlike our water solutions business, where we're really selling solutions potentially under an investment or leasing model, but it's still a sort of a transactional business that you grow over time, as we have.
Like a normal business that people think of.
Like a normal business.
Yeah.
The metal recovery business, we're very focused on finding partners and 2 or 3 or 4 assets, and within those assets we share in the upside.
Okay.
But the model we discuss at the moment is a bit flexible, so that could be that we co-invest, right? So that we would then get a share because we co-invest and get a share of the upside. It could be that we get a share just by putting in our technology, and sort of the lightest side of that range is that we get a license fee. And that share of the range is more linked to, we just acquired a new dewatering technology. That's one of the discussions we're having with a number of customers, where we say, okay, we help you dewater your tailings. There might not, or there might be also valuable upside with metals, but irrespective of what's on that side, we like a license fee for applying our technology. But in all cases, our metal recovery business is very focused on getting that upside. The value we create, one way or the other, we're looking to get a share of that value.
Okay, interesting. I'm learning a lot as we speak, I must admit. So, to me, water is actually, in some ways, more important than the metals we trying to find, the lithiums, the coppers, the nickels, because as you rightly put out in the beginning, is that without that you can't have the mining process, and with the ESG compliant that a lot of these companies have to do, whether it's rehab or the cleanliness of the way you do your business,
Yes,
is very important. When we look at Clean TeQ, and I see, your market cap's at 25 million, where the value feels like there's a lot of value on the table still to take.
yes.
How are you seeing that when you talk to people, the investors, and obviously you're selling the idea. I love the concept, right?
Yes.
You can go into that a bit more.
Yes,
But
yes.
how are you when you talk to these guys out there? What's your reception like?
So how I see it, or how other people see
Well,
it?
what's the reaction from the people you talk to? I'm thinking, feels like there's a lot of value on the table.
Yes, yes.
Left there, right? Not
Yes.
yet taken. Are you getting the same vibe from the potential investors and the?
Yes, so I think that the vibe I'm getting in Australia is, one is I do think more and more people do realize that the ESG part, or the license to operate, they used to call it a license to operate, right? The big oil and mining companies, they felt you need a license to operate, which effectively means you need to be a proper company, you need to take care of the environment, etc. So, but I think that was always, I wouldn't call it an afterthought, but it was definitely not sort of in their core business. I think that one has moved to the core, and that's the sort of the ESG side of businesses, the license to operate. But I think the second thing has moved to the core, as you rightly pointed out, is that it's not just a license to operate, it's purely the ability to operate, right? If there's no water, you cannot continue to operate. If the government just shuts you down because your tailing is full, which is happening, we're talking to some of those companies, it's not a license to operate, you cannot continue operating, it's just a core business. And I think that realization is there, obviously with our customers that we talk to, but I think also in the feedback you get from investors. I think more and more investors come to you and say, hey, I feel this is going to be a very important trend linked to mining. And I think our biggest shareholder, Robert Friedland, is a great example of that. He's been for a while saying this loudly, that this is a very, very important element and a resource that's going to be very, very critical for the development of mining and the metal industry. In terms of active investment, I think we are still seen as a very new company, which in a way we are, because we only just listed. And also we are, because if you look at our revenue history, we're only now on our business solutions starting to grow. So what has happened over the last few years is we got our first large-scale plants out there with our technology package. Right, so our underlying technology has been developed for a couple of decades, but it's only been in the last few years that we built those solutions on top of that. The nitrate removal, I just gave as an example. We have a phosphate recovery. We have a certain heavy metal removal. So we have a number of technologies in there, and it's only recently that we put them out there. And these plans, the fact that we've been growing the revenues and that we get the interest to us is a strong proof of our ability to sell and our ability to grow. But I think the feedback from investors and from a lot of people is, hey, that sounds really, really interesting. But they get to know us just now, right? It's still only a year that they got to learn about us and see what we're doing and see our growth. So I think that's the feedback in Australia. The other thing I would like to mention is the difference between Australia and Europe and the US. There is I think the trend of ESG and water treatment in particular, and the interest of investor and the share prices of some of these companies are running much higher in Europe and the US at the moment than they do in Australia. So that's just another observation that I think is a difference between Australia and the rest of the world.
When an investor looks at you guys,
Yeah.
and they're hearing what we're talking about, and they're probably feeling, wow, this is great, because water's critical resource, and we can do this and do that.
Yeah.
Next thing that they think will be, does it really work? Because So can you share with us a response to that thought?
Yeah, and I think that's again a very good question, because that's what we are clearly doing is providing a new technology in the market, right? So a new environmental technology. So all our solutions are built around these unique technologies. So the next question is indeed then, does it work? And I think that is very, very relevant.
Or work well, and work
does
well.
it work well? Yeah, right. And I think the biggest proof of that is in your ability to sell. So what we did in the last few years is quite unique, because what we sold large-scale plants to existing customers in a competitive environment, right? So what often happens is when you try to mature a technology, and solar, but even water is a good example of that, is that the first large-scale plants you build on your own balance sheet. But we have a bit of history. We do extensive piloting, extensive discussion with the customer. So we were able to generate those revenues in a competitive market, and we've been handing over those plants and have been operating very well over the last few years. So I think you can look at the plants we handed over and the fact that we continue to grow our pipeline as a clear proof that our technology is working. And a water sector, I think a lot of sort of these semi-utility sectors, there's a lot of conservatism with customers for good reasons, right? It's important. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of other companies doing that. There's some very, very big companies. There's engineering firms that are always difficult to break through, right? Because they know what they've been doing over the last 30 years. So the fact that we've been able to break through that market and win some very high profile project is, I think, the first clear proof to investors and to the market that we're sitting on a portfolio of solutions that are really unique and have a lot of upside potential. That would be my first answer to your question, and I'm obviously, for any investor, happy to go in more detail on what that means exactly.
I mean, I can see the water treatment side, and that solution there is the market size and the potential is huge, right? Nitrate is, as you say, it's rightly so. I've had some history with prawn farming. Yes, that is the biggest killer of prawns in a pond, right?
Yeah, no, you're completely right.
Yeah. So the metal recovery one is the one that obviously is I'm really interested to know more, is the history of it and the availability of success to you guys. Can you share with us some to give us an insight into where that could go, or where it is and where it is now?
Yes, I can, of course. I think I don't want to overemphasize that example, because it's a bit different, because Sunrise was a new mine.
Yep.
But I think as a model or as a vision, it does apply to some extent, right? Saying, hey, there's assets out there that are not being fully used. So then to paint another picture. So first of all, at the moment we've done various experiments. We work on various metals. So we're very focused on the battery metal sector. So I think if you look at from the market to us, right, the market clearly needs an enormous amount of battery metals. And I think for some of those metals, it's clear that opening new mines is not going to meet that demand. And you know this better than I do probably on this enormous shortages that people see for the next 5 to 10 years. So in that sense, the demand for getting those metals out of tailings, getting those metals out of wastewater, getting them out of evaporation ponds is certainly there and is only going to grow. We have developed a number of sort of special solutions, and we've done a lot of testing and working with customers for some of those battery metals. So that's vanadium, copper, nickel, cobalt, also lithium, for example. So I think on those two areas, conceptually, we certainly see a lot of potential there. On the maturity of the technology, I didn't mention that yet, but our technology, one of our core technology is continuous ion exchange. It's basically using resins to selectively pull out certain metals or certain other pollutants, but for metal recovery, that's metals. That technology has actually been developed decades ago in Russia. So, and at the time, the Russians were the only one to do it. Really, in Kazakhstan, that was what's happening. So, Clean TeQ bought that technology a while ago and developed it onwards. So, in terms of where is that technology, there are still much of the uranium of the world is being produced by a similar process to the processes we have. So, the process that's at the core of a lot of our current discussions is actually a technology with a long history and a long history of great success where it was applied.
Okay. You brought up Robert Friedland, and Robert Friedland in my industry is the guy who has brought all the major elephant stories that you could think of in terms of projects. His foresight is sort of something that people always hang on to. When I see a company like yourself, and even though it's in water, and which is actually quite a good thing, because that means I say, hey, you know what, Mr. Friedland can see this and can feel it. And part of me feels like, you know, as I've sort of expressed to you, water is really, I would almost put it up as one of the most important component of any project. You can't drill without water. You can't mine without water. And if your tailings dam break, you have a big problem.
Yes, exactly.
So all this kind of concept in water, and even if in the water that we drink in that scale, is actually the water corporations actually have a problem with how clean the water is, and there's big debates of how much clean the water, how clean the water should we be drinking, etc., etc.
Very much.
So I get the whole concept of water thing.
Yes.
From an investor point of view, obviously you're not the company that goes, oh, we just drilled this number of meters and we got this number of grams, and hey, you know, dancing girls are out. When investors look at you, how should they look at Clean TeQ? Is that a question you could answer? From a you know, from an investor point of view.
No, it's a good question. And I would say yes. So as an investor, and I have been presenting that over the last year as well, I think what you should look at us is we have a unique technology portfolio on the back of which we're building a water business. And I think if you look at our history, it's very clearly we're meeting very strong demand in the market, right? We're still small, we've invested a lot in R&D, and you see that payoff now happening, right? So we have fast growing revenues, and in the next year, we're looking to make our international projects profitable as a business, and then China is a bit of a separate unit, that the next year that will come. So for that business, for investors, they buy into that growth story, right? But then on top of that, we have the two other businesses, our new membranes and our metal recovery, which as an investor, you need to make your own opinion on, right? Because it's a bit earlier, so there's more risk, but there's enormous upside in those two businesses. So that's how I would look at the business. So you buy into an existing growth story that's developing very, very quickly, and you at the same time have these two very large upside options, you can call it. I have a lot of confidence in it, so I feel I'm sort of underselling them a bit by calling them upside options. But it is a way to look at our business, because we do not yet have the revenues or the projects to say, for the metal recovery, this is the project that's going to give us a $200 million extra market cap, right? We're working on some of those projects to get a very large upside by applying our technology. Same for our membranes. If you look at some of the international companies that have developed a new membrane platform, there are very, very few of them. A lot of companies use membranes, but actually buy the membrane from other companies, from companies like DuPont. We have developed our own membrane platform, and there are some companies in Europe and the US where you have multi-$100 million market caps on those companies, or valuations on those companies that have developed a new membrane platform. And we certainly feel that our new platform, this graphene-based platform, has this enormous upside potential. We're very close to market introduction. We're going to do pilots in the next year, and then we're ready to sell. So both of these things, in our own view, have enormous upside potential and are close to it. I think the investor needs to make its own sort of view on how they see that market. That's how I would describe the business. So we have one underlying business that's growing, where we're showing to the market and to the customers our potential and our ability to grow globally, and then the other two businesses that provide this extra upside.
Okay. Competitors, who are they? People doing the same thing? What's the story there?
So I would say, if I focus on the water solutions business, of course there's competitors. The market, the water market is very, very fragmented. if you look at it in a little bit more detail, you see a lot of integrators. So a lot of companies are effectively integrating existing solutions into different flow sheets, as you call it. But basically, you build a plant and you have some existing solutions. Also, a lot of the water market is still relatively standard. So it's relatively standard biological treatment for municipal, for example. It's relatively standard desalination. So the number of companies that are in this market that truly provide innovative solutions, that are basically willing and able to get in and provide something different to what's out there are very few of them. So we're one of them. So in that sense, they always ask me, who do you compete with? It's very hard for me to point to 2 or 3 competitors, because for the project we've won around the world, we never see a competitor twice. And that's just because we have a relatively unique solution. That would be different if we would be an integrator of standard membranes. You, in Australia, say, focus on that, you would see relatively standard competitors. But because we go for the relatively advanced treatment, so we really look at places where you need full recycling, or where you want to completely eliminate secondary waste, or when you go to really, really clean effluent water. In those cases, you are in a more advanced area, and we're around the world, so see different competitors in different cases. Our biggest obstacle is almost always the customer. The customer and the engineering firm, if there's an engineering firm next to it, that needs to look at us and say, we see the benefits and we think they're so large that we would like to work with you, instead of the more sort of standard solution that's out there. And sometimes that's just because our cost is much lower, but sometimes is it because what we do is really unique and they really need something different from what's out there.
Okay. We touch a lot on the upside, and what's the downside? What could create a lot of headaches for you and sleepless nights?
We're still a young company. So and that's, I think, obviously, if you look at us, so we're a young company. As a whole, we're not profitable yet. So I just mentioned our international business. Next year, we have 2 good contracts to justify that view. But we have the other 2 businesses that are not. We have overhead. So I think that's the headache, right? We're a young growth company, and we've just 1 year separated. We have this longer history, as I explained earlier. It's only in the last few years. It's actually in the middle of COVID that we got our first salesperson on board, right? So only at that point did we start to sell in the market. So I think that's the risky part of a young technology business like us.
Yeah.
Also, I think to emphasize, we are strongly built on innovation. And I think we're very much proving our ability to take innovation, real R&D, the products of R&D, you could say, and bring them to the market to huge effect. But that does mean that we as a company do have a relatively large engineering group with advanced specialists and experts, etc. So our cost structure is not some other water companies that is basically, not to be dismissive of it, but that can be 3 mechanical engineers that buy something from China and then they move to the customer and implement it, right? You can get very low cost structures there, but ultimately I don't think you will be struggling much more to build a really big company that's really profitable. So we are very much on the path towards building that, and that's by offering solutions that can earn that margin. But we're still in the early phase. So as I just mentioned, all the plants that we put out recently were first-time plants. So we've invested substantially to get them up and running, right? So I think that's an important point to make, and I think there's enormous upside, but we are still an early stage company in that sense.
Going forward, news flow. Investors love this kind of stuff. So what could they be expecting from you guys?
So first on our business solutions, our water solutions business, one of the news flow is contracts, right? So new contracts. Another very important point is just in the last few months, we won 2 very important orders. So one was in the Northern Territories for bore water treatment for local Aboriginal communities, where we take out uranium in a more efficient way than the alternative would do. That's part of a much bigger program. So we see that as an enormous growth potential going forward. A second area that we see as a major milestone is our project in Townsville, which is recovery from municipal, so it's recycling from municipal, and it's a very big project, and it's also a trend that's global at the moment, where municipal water that's treated needs to be reused, right? There's so much areas with drought and other issues, so far it's treated, it's not even that dirty, but it's still being put into the river or the sea, etc. That has to stop. In areas where there's water shortage, you need to reuse that. And I think these two projects give us a huge scope for further growth. And in the reuse market is an example where our solutions really come to fruition, our benefits are really very apparent. So that's one area of news flow where we're hoping to build on those. The second one is linked to a recent agreement we have to fund these projects ourselves. So instead of selling the equipment, and we will have trailing revenues when we sell our equipment because we sell consumables and we do maintenance, etc. But with this partner, we really will be operating those plants for 20 years. So that's an area where we see that future growth in the news flow. On the other two businesses, metal recovery, we are discussing, as I mentioned at the beginning, with a number of asset owners and project companies are the application of our technology in their assets, and we're looking for equity upside. I cannot say more because it's sensitive, right? And if it would be already in a more advanced stage, we would announce that. But it is an area we're focused on, and we're focused on battery metals. That includes things like lithium, right? And we all know how hot it is. We think our technologies fit very well with lithium, especially lithium from brines, because we know how to deal with brines. We do that all the time. In fact, a lot of our solutions are very applicable and developed for brine. So that's an example where we're talking. So I cannot say anything more specific at this moment, but we see that as a very important area. The third one is the pneumatic graphene membrane business. We are working with a number of customers to get the pilots out there, right? So we've as I said earlier, we're ready for market introduction. We want to get the pilots out there, and on the back of the pilots, we want to sign large-scale contracts. So that's really for people who have sort of that, maybe that want to see that proof. That's what they can be looking for in the next few months, that we show them these pilots are running and are working, and the promised energy benefits, which can be up to 30 to 50% energy saving compared to the alternative. These pilots will need to show to the market and to our investors that these benefits are being realized.
Okay. Well, you've answered my next question, why CNQ in that one run, but I think from my point of view and from many investors, and I'll get you to comment at the end how relevant that is that when I see this, obviously, as I said before, I think water's on the top of issues, and then I see your major shareholder, Robert Friedland, there, and knowing where he's puts himself in terms of new technology, new ideas, new concepts, gives me that confidence that, hey, maybe I'm not a lone soldier here, whereas this guy must know what he's doing. He's investing his own money, and so when I went to summarize CNQ, is that sort of the picture that you want the world or the shareholding investment community out there to see, is that CNQ is stable, or should I maybe, rather than put words in your mouth, is that the image that you want people to see CNQ as going forward?
So I'm not sure if I fully get the question, but let me try to answer it, which I think you're asking for. We are in an early stage. I think we've shown enormous growth. We show enormous potential. We have backing by some visionary investors and mining people, right? So before I finish that sentence, let me emphasize that mining is just part of our business. So our water solutions business is also, for example, oil and gas and industry, and municipal. But leaving that aside, if you look at sort of the big picture and the growth, what you see is an enormous amount of focus, investor focus, and money being ready to be deployed in water. And what you actually see is a huge mismatch at the moment, especially in Europe and the US, and to some extent in Australia, of money that's waiting to be deployed in water. And that's pension funds, but it's also big companies. It's also companies like BP and Shell, so the big oil companies, for example, that have said we need to spend, of the projects we build, we need to spend, say, 5%, 10% in water. In China, it's actually regulation. If you build a huge municipal, you need to put them on. So there's a lot of money, but it includes investor money of the big funds that's looking to invest. The problem is that the number of technology companies out there that are sort of ready to receive that money is very limited, right? There's a lot of general engineering companies, and there's companies like ours, which a lot of people are very interested in it, but they're looking at us and we're a bit small. So if you're a big pension fund, we had that when we just listed, right? If you're, or another fund, or a PE fund, etc., you are looking to deploy that capital in water, but you often have minimum requirements. You need to be 100 million market cap or 500 million market cap, etc. So, and that mismatch, in a way, that's what we're trying to bridge. So we're looking to grow in the next 2 years, 3 years, into a level where I think the amount of interest and money to really improve the water sector and therefore water availability is enormous. There's enormous interest and I think an enormous demand. And I think the challenge for us is now to go from where we are today to reach that size, to reach that coverage, to have that proof, to have that portfolio, and then suddenly a lot of big companies will be very interested in us.
Okay. Great way to finish. And part of that sort of going forward and working with community, I've teamed up with Florence Drummond, who is the founder of Women in Mining Resource Australia, and we came up, we said, look, why don't we give something away that's from the community. The Jala Jala coffee is a gift to you for coming on Coffee with Samso.
Thank
So
you
that's
very much.
for you, and yes, you need water to make your coffee.
That's exactly true.
And again, look, Willem, thank you. It's a fantastic story. I think that water is something that people know is important, but they don't actually quite understand the complexity in what's involved. You know, every part of it. I mean, my interest is, I think, in this conversation, is really about water, because mining or whatever it is, water is the key. Without water, you can't do anything. And with that, thank you again, and we'll continue the journey. And I'm glad I caught you guys at 25 million market cap and not 1 billion, so I can take credit for bringing it to the story.
Thank you. No.
All right, thank you again.
Thanks. It was a pleasure. Thanks.
All right.